By the end of this year, Henry. The old man's voice trembled, yet carried the weight of command. You will give me a grandchild, or you'll lose everything that bears our name. The words cut through the air, like a verdict. Henry Ford froze mid-step, his sharp blue eyes flicking from the tall windows of the Ford Global Tower to his father seated behind the oak desk. The skyline of Manhattan glowed beyond the glass, but inside that office everything felt suffocating cold, heavy, and final. Is this a threat or just another one of your manipulations, Father? He asked, his tone measured, but tight, like a man holding back a storm. Arthur Ford leaned forward, the veins on his hands visible, his gray eyes filled with a desperation that didn't fit a billionaire who once conquered Wall Street. It's my dying wish, he said. I've given you power, Henry. Money. The company. But no legacy survives without blood to carry it. Henry's jaw clenched. The word legacy had always been his father's favorite weapon. Don't talk about dying. You've said that every year since I was 20. Henry replied, running a hand through his dark blonde hair. And you know I don't do families, Father. Not after what you did to ours. Arthur exhaled guilt, flashing in his eyes, but it was too late. The wound had long scarred over with bitterness. Henry turned to leave, but his father's voice followed sharper, now slicing through the silence. If you walk out that door without giving me your word, you'll lose everything. The company, the penthouse, every single share I still control. It all goes to charity. Henry stopped cold. The air between them hummed with tension. Then I'll build another empire, he said quietly, without your name. But as he pushed the glass door open, something flickered across his father's face, a mixture of sorrow and fear. You're just like your mother, Arthur whispered so faintly, Henry almost didn't catch it. Too proud to love. And look where it got her. Henry froze. For the first time in years, that name, Margaret, felt like a dagger twisting in his chest. He walked away before the memories could swallow him whole. Outside, the night wind hit him hard. Manhattan glittered below like a field of diamonds, indifferent and alive. Inside his black Bentley, Henry loosened his tie, staring at the reflection of his own face in the tinted window. A man the world saw as perfect, impeccably dressed, devastatingly handsome, ruthlessly efficient. But inside he was hollow. He remembered his mother's trembling hands, her voice asking where his father was the night she died. He remembered the rumors, the whispers of Arthur Ford's affair with a young woman from South Carolina. And he remembered the silence that followed, the kind that rotted a heart from the inside. Love was a lie. Families were currency. That was the gospel he lived by. When his phone buzzed, the voice of his assistant broke the quiet. Sir, your schedule for tomorrow. Cancel everything. Henry said, his tone flat. Everything, sir. Yes. And tell legal to prepare a private contract. There was a pause. May I ask what for? Henry's lips curved into something between a smile and a wound. A surrogate agreement, he said. I'm done wasting time looking for love. The next morning, Ford Global Energy's executive floor was silent when he walked in. Employees straightened at their desks. The women in pencil skirts whispered behind manicured hands. He ignored them all. James, he said to his secretary, who immediately stood up. Yes, Mr. Ford. Did you find suitable candidates? James handed him a folder thick with profiles. All screened, sir. Background checks, medical education. The best agencies in New York and Chicago. A few are waiting in the conference room for interviews. Henry took the folder without expression. Good. Send them in one by one. Minutes later, the door opened and a young woman entered, nervous, smiling too brightly. Good morning, Mr. Ford. What's your motivation for applying? Henry cut her off, his tone clinical. I'm studying medicine, sir, and I need the money for tuition. You can leave, he said. She blinked. I beg your pardon. I don't buy wombs from ambition. Next, the girl fled and the door closed behind her. The next 3 applicants didn't last 2 minutes each. By the time the last one left, Henry's patience had evaporated. He dropped the folder onto the table, its papers scattering like the fragments of something meaningless. Cancel the list, he said. James hesitated. Sir, your father's deadline. I said, cancel it. Henry grabbed his coat and walked out. That night, Manhattan was a blur of lights and noise. Henry rarely went out, but Justin, his oldest friend, and the only man reckless enough to challenge him, had insisted. Come on, man, Justin said through the phone. Stop acting like a robot. There's a new club downtown. Let's drink, flirt, and remind the world that you're still human. I have no interest in... You need this, Henry, for your sanity. The line went dead before Henry could argue. Hours later, he was there. The Velvet Room, a place of champagne silk dresses and careless laughter. He sat at the bar, nursing a glass of scotch, barely listening to the music. Mr. Ford, you're missing the point. Justin laughed, sliding beside him. Look around you. Every woman here would sell her soul to be in your arms. Then they're not my type, Henry muttered, finishing his drink. Justin sighed dramatically. Fine, be a saint. I'll find you a sinner. Henry ignored him and turned away, just as someone bumped into his shoulder. The impact sent a glass crashing to the floor. I'm so sorry. The voice was soft, but trembling, feminine, untrained in the artifice of the city. Henry looked down. She was beautiful, perhaps too real for a place like this. Dark curls framed her caramel skin, her brown eyes wide, frightened, almost glowing beneath the neon lights. She wore a simple black dress, one strap slightly fallen from her shoulder, and she looked lost. It's fine, Henry said, but she was already kneeling to pick up the shards. A drop of blood formed on her palm. Don't, he said sharply, crouching beside her before he realized what he was doing. He took her hand, inspecting the small cut. The sight of blood on her skin sent a strange jolt through him, unfamiliar, unwelcome. She tried to pull away. I said I'm fine. Clearly you're not, he murmured. I don't need help, she said, standing up. I just work here. He raised an eyebrow. As what, a waitress, she replied, and for some reason it sounded like an apology. Henry stood studying her face. What's your name? Elena, she said quietly. Elena. What? Ramirez. There was something in the way she said it, unsteady, yet proud, that caught him off guard. He took out a handkerchief and offered it to her. You're bleeding, Miss Ramirez. She hesitated, then took it, pressing it against her palm. Thanks. I'll pay for the glass. You won't. He said, his voice calm, but commanding. How much do you make here? In a night, her eyes narrowed. Why? Because I'll pay you 10 times that to come with me tonight. The words slipped out colder than he meant them. It wasn't desire that drove him. It was control, the one thing he still knew how to wield. Her lips parted in disbelief. Excuse me, I'm serious, he said, pulling out a black card. Name your price. For a moment her face hardened, pride warring with desperation. Then her phone rang. She turned away to answer it, and he caught only fragments. Mom. The hospital. No, I'll find the money. When she hung up, her eyes glistened. You said 10 times, she whispered. Yes. She took a breath that seemed to cost her everything. Then I'll go with you. The hotel suite was silent, except for the soft hum of the city beyond the windows. Elena stood by the door, trembling, her mind screaming at her to run. But the image of her mother's hospital bed flashed behind her eyelids, and her hands refused to move. Henry poured himself a drink, watching her from across the room. "You can leave if you want," he said quietly. She looked at him confused. "I'm not forcing you," he added, setting down the glass. "But if you stay, I'll make sure your family never worries about money again." The tears she'd been holding back finally fell. "Why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could have anyone." He walked closer, his expression unreadable. "Because you didn't pretend to want me." And before she could answer, he kissed her. The taste of whiskey and salt, the smell of rain through the open window, the quiet surrender of two broken souls seeking warmth in all the wrong ways. At dawn, Henry woke alone. On the nightstand lay a blood-stained handkerchief, his own folded neatly beside an untouched envelope of cash. He picked it up, staring at the faint red mark on the white linen. It shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. If you've ever believed that love only begins with perfection, remember, sometimes it starts with a mistake, a cut, a single drop of blood that refuses to fade. Stay with this story, and you'll see what that drop of blood truly meant. Rain swept across Manhattan the next evening, tracing silver veins down the windows of Ford Global Tower. Inside the office, lights glowed like embers against the storm. Henry sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled, the same untouched glass of whiskey melting beside him. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, Elena Ramirez, framed by city lights and hesitation. The way she looked at him that night, not with desire, but with fear and something else he couldn't name. He had told himself it meant nothing, that she was one of many strangers in a city built on transactions. But somehow that single night had carved itself into his memory like a scar that refused to heal. "Sir," came a voice from the doorway. James, his secretary, stood with a folder in hand. "Your father called twice this morning. I'm aware." Henry interrupted, his tone flat. "Tell him I'm handling it." James hesitated. "And the surrogate project?" Sir Henry's gaze flicked to the rain-blurred skyline. "Restart it." James blinked, uncertain. "Do you mean I said restart it?" Henry snapped, then exhaled softly, rubbing his temples. "I'll find the candidate myself." He didn't explain that the candidate had already been found, or perhaps had found him. 2 days later, the rain had cleared. The city was painted gold under the late afternoon sun. At a small apartment in Brooklyn, Elena stood by the window, clutching a crumpled hospital bill in her hand. Her mother's condition had worsened. Dialysis wasn't enough anymore. The doctor said she needed surgery soon. She stared at the total cost at the bottom of the page. $78,000. It might as well have been $1 million. On the counter lay a small white envelope. Inside was a card embossed with a simple logo, Ford Global Energy, and beneath it, a name, Henry Ford, and a phone number. She had tried to throw it away 3 times. Each time, something in her chest stopped her: guilt, fear, hope. She didn't know which. When the phone finally rang, she almost didn't pick up. "Miss Ramirez," the voice was male, crisp, professional. "This is James Hawthorne, Mr. Ford's executive secretary. He asked me to reach out to confirm your availability." She froze. "My availability for what?" "For a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Ford Global Tower." Her breath caught. "Did he say what it's about?" "He said you'd understand." The call ended before she could reply. Elena leaned against the wall, her pulse racing. The city outside felt suddenly enormous, as if she were standing at the edge of something she couldn't name. When she arrived the next morning, she felt like she'd walked into another world. The lobby of Ford Global Tower stretched upward like a cathedral glass marble and quiet power. Every step she took echoed against the floor. Security guards in suits checked her ID. Assistants with tablets whispered as she passed. She smoothed the hem of her modest gray dress, trying to hide how her hands trembled. Miss Ramirez said a man approaching her, the same voice from the phone. James Hawthorne was tall, polite, but unreadable. "Mr. Ford is expecting you. This way, please." The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the space before her looked more like an art gallery than an office, minimalist, expensive, deliberate. He was standing by the window, sunlight cutting across his face. Henry turned when he heard the door. Their eyes met. "Miss Ramirez," he said simply, gesturing toward the sofa. "Please sit." Her knees felt weak, but she obeyed. "I wasn't sure you'd call," he said, his tone unreadable. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. There was silence, the kind that made the air feel thick. Henry walked to his desk, opened a folder, and placed a document on the table between them. "This is a legal agreement," he said. "It's confidential. If you sign it, you'll be compensated generously." Elena hesitated, eyes flicking to the paper. "For what exactly?" "For carrying my child," he said, his voice calm, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, I need an heir," he said. "And I don't have time for marriage or love or whatever illusion people are selling these days." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied. "You'll receive $1 million upon delivery, plus full medical care, housing, and an additional allowance during the pregnancy. Everything will be handled discreetly." Elena stood her chair, scraping the floor. "You think I'd sell my body for money?" Henry looked up, his expression still, but his eyes were storming. "You already did once." Her heart lurched. He regretted it the moment it left his mouth, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like broken glass. Elena's voice shook. "That night, you don't know what I went through. I don't want to," he said, colder now, shielding the flicker of guilt. "I'm not asking for your story, Miss Ramirez. I'm offering you a contract, nothing more." She looked down, her hands trembling. Her pulse roared in her ears. In her mind flashed the hospital room, her mother's face pale and smiling weakly through the pain. "Don't cry, Hija. We'll be fine." Fine. That word had never felt so cruel. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Henry studied her for a long moment, then slid a card across the table. "When you're ready, my secretary will handle the details." She left without looking back. But outside, when the elevator doors closed, Elena leaned against the mirrored wall, pressing a hand to her chest. She could feel the ache in her pulse, not just from shame or anger, but from something deeper, something that terrified her. That night, she sat alone in her tiny Brooklyn apartment. The rain had returned, drumming softly against the window. She turned the contract over in her hands, again and again. The numbers blurred. $1 million. Enough to save her mother. Enough to start over. Enough to stop being scared every time the phone rang from the hospital. But the price wasn't money. It was herself. She closed her eyes. "God," she whispered, "if there's another way, show me." The phone rang. She jumped, her heart in her throat. It was her sister. "Elena, Mom's getting worse. The doctors say we have until tomorrow to make a decision. They need the deposit tonight, or they won't do the surgery." Elena's throat closed. "How much?" 20,000. They said it's just the start." I'll handle it, she said, before she even knew what she was saying. Elena. Just stay with her, she said softly. Tell her I'll fix this. When the call ended, she stared at her reflection in the rain-streaked window, a young woman who'd run out of choices. At midnight, she picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. James Hawthorne speaking. It's Elena, she said, barely above a whisper. Tell Mr. Ford. I accept. The following morning, she returned to Ford Global Tower. Henry was already waiting when she arrived. Suit. Crisp eyes, unreadable, like the man she'd met, had never bled emotion in his life. Are you sure, he asked. She nodded. I signed the papers. He took them, glancing briefly before setting them aside. Then from now until the contract ends, you'll live in my penthouse. It's more secure. Her voice faltered. Live with you. He met her gaze steady. It's practical. There are health protocols and discretion matters. Elena's heart pounded. And when it's over, you'll have your money, he said quietly, and you'll never have to see me again. There was a shadow behind his voice, something he tried to hide, regret maybe, or the faint echo of humanity. She nodded slowly. I'll send for you tonight, he said. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, softer this time. Miss Ramirez. She looked back. You don't have to be afraid of me. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's what men always say before giving you a reason to be. He said nothing as the door closed behind her. But when he was alone, Henry stared at the empty chair she had sat in, and for the first time in years, he felt the faintest sting of something dangerously close to doubt. Outside, the storm began again, steady and relentless, washing the city clean of its sins. Somewhere beneath that rain, a deal had been made, one that would bind two hearts neither of them yet believed they had left to give. The city glimmered beneath a veil of evening mist when Elena arrived at the address Henry had given her. The Ford Penthouse, Central Park West. From the outside, the tower was nothing short of breathtaking, an endless column of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. The doorman greeted her by name before she even spoke, his voice crisp and respectful. It felt surreal, as if her life had been rewritten overnight. Miss Ramirez, said the concierge, pressing the elevator button that required a private key card. Mr. Ford is expecting you. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its silent ascent. Elena's reflection trembled in the mirrored walls. The same simple dress, the same worn shoes, yet everything around her belonged to another world. Her hands clenched around the strap of her small bag, and she whispered to herself, This isn't forever. You're doing this for Mom. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The penthouse was vast, an expanse of marble and warm light, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the glittering sweep of Manhattan below. Abstract paintings adorned the walls, and a faint scent of cedar and espresso lingered in the air. It felt like stepping into someone's carefully controlled dream. She didn't see him at first. Only his voice, deep calm, slightly rough at the edges, broke through the quiet. You're early? Elena turned. Henry stood by the kitchen island, a glass of wine in his hand. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar sleeves, rolled to his elbows. The light caught the faint line of a scar beneath his wrist. Small, pale, almost invisible, but it drew her eyes for a heartbeat longer than it should have. I thought it was better than being late, she said softly. Good, he replied. Punctuality matters here. There was a flicker of something between them, not warmth, but recognition. Two people pretending to be indifferent, while the air betrayed them. He gestured toward the hallway. Your room is down there. second on the left. You'll find everything you need." She nodded and started to walk, but his voice stopped her. "Elena." She turned. "There are rules," he said, setting the glass down. "You'll have full access to the apartment, but not my office. You'll attend your medical appointments. James will drive you. Everything you eat, drink, or take will be monitored. I expect transparency." She held his gaze, and in return, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "You'll be taken care of." Elena wanted to ask what that meant, taken care of, but the words stuck in her throat. She only nodded and slipped down the hall, her footsteps barely making a sound. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment in Brooklyn. There was a queen-sized bed, dressed in white linen, a balcony overlooking the city, a bathroom lined with marble and glass. On the dresser, she found a small note written in neat masculine handwriting. "You don't have to thank me. Just rest." She stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. Later that night, Elena wandered into the living room. The city was alive below cars, like fireflies, the park stretching dark and endless. Henry was there, seated on the couch, the glow of his laptop reflecting off his face. She hesitated at the edge of the room. "You work even at night." He didn't look up. "Energy doesn't sleep. Neither do you, apparently." The corner of his mouth twitched, a hint of amusement that faded too quickly. Old habits. She walked toward the window, crossing her arms against the cool glass. "You live above everything," she murmured. "It's beautiful. And lonely." He looked up then, eyes catching hers. Lonely silence. "This big doesn't sound peaceful," she said. "It sounds like something you're trying not to hear." He closed the laptop slowly, the faintest shadow crossing his features. "You're not here to analyze me, Miss Ramirez." "I know," she said softly. "But maybe you should let someone talk to you once in a while, even if it's just a girl you're paying to stay here." The words hung in the air, not defiant, but painfully honest. Henry exhaled, leaning back against the couch. "You have a strange way of talking to your employer." "I'm not your employee," she said. "Just your arrangement." His eyes darkened, not in anger, but in something unreadable. He stood walking toward her, until only the faint hum of the city separated them. Then maybe he said quietly, "We should stop pretending we know what we are." Her heart raced. She stepped back, bumping against the window. "You're right, we shouldn't." And she left the room before the silence could swallow her whole. The next few days settled into a fragile rhythm. Mornings began with the soft clatter of dishes and the faint smell of coffee. Henry often left before dawn, his voice echoing faintly as he spoke to someone on the phone numbers, deadlines, contracts. Elena would sit by the balcony eating quietly, her eyes tracing the skyline. Sometimes he'd return earlier than expected. Once, she found him standing near the piano, a beautiful black Steinway that looked untouched. "You play?" she asked. "Not anymore," he said without turning. "Why not?" He hesitated, fingers brushing the keys lightly, producing a sound so delicate it hurt. "Because every note reminds me of what I lost." She didn't ask more. But that night, when she thought he was asleep, she played a single melody, soft, hesitant from memory, a lullaby her mother used to hum. When she turned, she saw him standing in the doorway. He didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. For the first time, she saw something fragile in him, a silence that wasn't cold, but human. Days turned into weeks. The tension between them shifted, less sharp, more like an ache neither of them named. Henry began to notice things he shouldn't. The way her laughter seemed to melt the stiffness in the air. The way she tucked a curl behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she looked at him, not with admiration, not with fear, but with honesty. He hated how it made him feel. He wasn't supposed to feel. One afternoon during her medical checkup, he accompanied her. It wasn't required, James could have gone, but he insisted. The doctor smiled as she took Elena's vitals. Healthy as ever, Miss Ramirez. You're doing everything right. Henry stood by the window, hands in pockets, pretending not to listen. When they stepped outside, Elena looked at him. You didn't have to come. I know. Then why did you? He looked down at her, the city wind catching the edge of her hair. Because I wanted to make sure you're okay. She laughed softly. You don't have to pretend to care, Mr. Ford. He stopped walking. Who says I'm pretending? Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The noise of the city faded until all she could hear was her pulse. But then he looked away, slipping the mask back on. We should go. The car's waiting. She followed silent, her heart caught between disbelief and something dangerously like hope. That night, the penthouse was quiet again. Henry poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. He stood by the window staring down at the city that had given him everything and taken just as much. He thought of his father, of the cold words, the deadlines, the inheritance hanging like a curse. Then he thought of her, of Elena's quiet resilience, her defiance wrapped in grace, the way she had called his loneliness by its true name. He didn't realize she was there until he heard her voice behind him. You shouldn't drink so much, she said softly. He turned. She stood barefoot in the hallway, wearing a pale sweater that hung loosely around her frame. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Bad habit, he said. Hard to break. She walked closer. Maybe you just never tried. He smiled faintly. You sound like someone who believes people can change. Don't you? He looked at her for a long moment. I used to. She came closer, her eyes searching his. What happened? I learned that love doesn't save anyone, he said quietly. It just teaches you how much you can lose. Elena's voice trembled. Maybe you've only seen the wrong kind of love. The air between them shifted, fragile and electric. He took a step toward her. Just one, but enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. Go to bed, Elena, he murmured, his voice low. Before I forget why you're here. She looked at him, pain flickering behind her eyes, but she nodded. Good night, Henry. Her footsteps faded down the hall. Henry stood there, the city still roaring beneath him, and for the first time since he could remember, he felt trapped between the man he had become and the man he might have been, if only he had met her sooner. And in her room, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding, her thoughts tangled in the echo of his words. Neither of them slept that night. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the penthouse, casting soft gold across the marble floors. The city below was alive with movement, but inside time felt slower, quieter, almost fragile. Elena stirred awake to the faint aroma of roasted coffee drifting through the air. She turned her head toward the sound, faint clinks, a low hum, and realized Henry was in the kitchen. She hesitated before getting up. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, her hair loose around her face, her eyes still tired, but no longer hollow. For weeks she'd lived here under the shadow of a contract. Yet something about this morning felt different. When she stepped out, Henry was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He didn't look up at first, but when he did, there was a trace of softness in his voice that startled her. You're up earlier than usual, he said. I could say the same, she replied, folding her arms. He nodded toward the mug beside him. Coffee? I didn't think you'd notice I'd drink it, she said, surprised. I notice more than you think. Their eyes met for a moment longer than either intended. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, but something warmer, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. She took the cup from his hand. "Thank you." Henry leaned against the counter, studying her as she blew lightly over the rim before taking a sip. He couldn't explain why he found the sight disarming, why the simplest act, her bare feet on the marble, her loose sweater sliding down one shoulder, could make his world tilt. "Do you always make coffee for your arrangements?" she asked lightly, breaking the silence. He almost smiled. "No, you're the first." Her heart gave a traitorous flutter. "Then I should feel honored." "You should," he said simply. She shook her head, laughing softly. "You're impossible." "Not impossible," he murmured almost to himself. "Just hard to understand." Their quiet laughter filled the room, brief but genuine. By noon, Henry was gone for a meeting downtown, and Elena was alone. She spent the day wandering the penthouse, trying not to think too much. She looked at the piano again, that dark, silent instrument that seemed to hold all his unspoken thoughts. Her fingers brushed the keys. A single note echoed through the room, low, hesitant, and lonely. "Go on," she whispered to herself. "Just one song." She played softly, losing herself in the melody. It was imperfect, but full of longing, the kind of sound that came from someone who felt too much and said too little. She didn't notice Henry return until she finished. "That piece," he said quietly from behind her. "My mother used to play it." Elena froze, turning toward him. He stood in the doorway, expression unreadable, though his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "I can stop now." He walked closer. "Don't stop." It sounded peaceful. She searched his face, and for the first time saw the faint shadow of the boy he once was, the one who'd watched his mother play, perhaps from this very spot. "Did she teach you?" she asked gently. He nodded. "When I was a child, before everything turned into business. And now?" "Now," he said, his gaze distant. "I play only in my head." Elena smiled faintly. "That's a lonely way to play." Lonely, he repeated the word strange on his tongue. "Maybe it's safer that way." She stood facing him fully. Maybe safety isn't always living. For a moment, the air between them was charged again, fragile electric. Then he looked away, breaking the spell. "I have to change for a dinner meeting," he said. "Stay if you'd like. The city looks better at night." She nodded, but when he walked away, something inside her twisted a quiet ache she couldn't name. Hours later, the penthouse felt colder without him. The lights of Manhattan blinked like a million restless hearts below. Elena sat on the couch pretending to read, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty chair across from her. When the door finally opened, she looked up. Henry stepped in his suit jacket, undone his tie, loosened exhaustion clinging to him like shadow. "Long night?" she asked softly. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "You could say that. Did the meeting go well?" "It never does," he said with a humorless laugh. "It's always about more money, more control, less time to breathe." She set the book aside. "Maybe you should let yourself breathe once in a while." He glanced at her. "And what would that fix?" "Maybe nothing," she said quietly. "But maybe everything." He sat across from her, elbows on his knees. The space between them felt intimate, even though neither moved. "I don't remember the last time someone told me that," he admitted. "Then you've been around the wrong people." His eyes lifted to hers, slow, searching. "And you think you're the right one?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I'm here." Something broke in him then, not visibly, not loudly, but in the quiet way that walls begin to crack before they crumble. He leaned back, exhaling. You make it sound easy. Staying. It's not, she whispered. But sometimes it's worth it. For a long time they said nothing. Only the hum of the city and the faint rhythm of their breathing filled the room. Then, almost without thinking, he reached out his fingers, brushing hers. She didn't pull away. His hand was warm, his touch tentative, as if he were afraid she might disappear. Why are you so calm? He asked quietly. Most people would have run by now. Maybe I'm too tired to run, she said with a small smile. His lips curved, not into a smile, but something close. You're strange, Elena Ramirez. I'll take that as a compliment. It is, he said. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Something fragile passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. The kind of connection that could ruin them both. And before either of them could stop it, Henry stood and closed the distance between them. Henry, she began, but the word dissolved as he cupped her face in his hand. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He just looked at her, searching her eyes, as if for permission. She could have stopped him. She should have. But instead she whispered, "Don't make this harder than it already is." His thumb brushed her cheek, slow and deliberate. "I'm not sure I can help it anymore." Her breath caught, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. His breath against her skin, her heart hammering against her ribs. But then he stepped back, as if realizing what he'd almost done. "Elena," he said hoarsely, "go to bed." Her lips parted. "Henry, please," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "Before I do something neither of us can undo." She wanted to argue, to ask why everything about him felt like gravity, but the look in his eyes stopped her. So she turned, her heart aching, and walked toward her room. As the door closed behind her, she pressed her forehead to the cool wood and let out the breath she'd been holding. Across the penthouse, Henry stood alone, staring at the spot where she'd just been. He poured another glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. Instead, he whispered into the quiet. "What are you doing to me, Elena?" In the following days, something subtle changed. They spoke less, but looked more. The silences grew heavier, threaded with words neither dared to say. He'd pass by her in the hallway, his hand brushing her arm, and it would linger a second too long. She'd glance up from the piano and find him watching her expression, unreadable. Every moment felt like standing on the edge of something vast and forbidden. One afternoon, as they stood by the balcony, the city bathed in gold beneath them. Henry spoke quietly. "I used to think control was everything," he said, "that if I kept my world in order, nothing could break me." "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind. "Now," he said, turning to her, "I think I'm starting to understand what chaos feels like." Her breath trembled. "Is that a good thing?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But when I look at you, I stop wanting to find out." The air between them thickened. He took a slow step forward, then another. "Henry." He stopped just inches away, his voice a whisper. "Tell me to stop." She didn't, and that silence, that single aching silence, said everything. When his lips finally found hers, the world didn't explode. It unfolded, softly, completely, with the inevitability of something that had been waiting all along. It wasn't passion that drove the kiss, but something deeper, the quiet breaking of two lonely souls who had forgotten what tenderness felt like. When they parted, Elena's voice trembled. "We shouldn't." "I know," he breathed, "but I can't pretend anymore." Neither could she. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware that somewhere above it all, two hearts that should never have met had begun to rewrite their own rules. One breath, one touch, one impossible promise at a time. The evening of Henry's 35th birthday arrived with a hush rather than fanfare. For someone who could summon an orchestra with a single phone call, he'd chosen silence. No guests, no champagne towers, no reporters pretending to admire him. Just the hum of the city, the muted glow of candles, and the woman who had changed everything without meaning to. Elena hadn't known it was his birthday. She found out by accident that afternoon, when James delivered a small envelope and said, "These are the files Mr. Ford asked for, and Miss Ramirez. Perhaps wish him a happy birthday." He won't admit it matters, but it does. She'd smiled half in disbelief. A man like Henry Ford, does he even care about birthdays? But when evening came, she couldn't shake the thought. He had done so much to make her life stable again, even if their arrangement had begun as something cold and transactional. And lately something unspoken pulsed between them, something that frightened her and comforted her all at once. So she decided. When he came home that night, the penthouse lights were dimmed. The table near the window was set simple, nothing extravagant. A bottle of wine she'd found in the cabinet, 2 plates of her mother's favorite dish arroz con pollo, and 1 small candle flickering between them. Henry stepped inside, loosening his tie, and froze. "Elena," he said softly, surprise flickering in his eyes. "What is this?" She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Dinner. And happy birthday." For a moment he didn't move. He just looked at her, really looked as though the words themselves carried more warmth than he'd felt in years. "You remembered," he said finally. "I found out," she corrected her tone, teasing. "You didn't exactly tell me." "I don't celebrate," he murmured. "I guessed that. But everyone deserves to be seen once a year, even the cold, terrifying Mr. Ford." His lips curved a rare, genuine smile. "Terrifying am I only when you forget you're human." That made him pause. Then he nodded toward the table. "May I?" She gestured for him to sit, her heart suddenly beating faster than it should. As they ate, the silence between them felt different, not heavy, not tense, but full. The kind of silence shared by 2 people who no longer needed to fill every space with words. "This is good," he said after a few bites. "It was my mother's recipe," Elena replied softly. "She used to make it every Sunday. Said the smell of rice and chicken meant family." Henry's gaze lingered on her face. "You miss her?" She nodded. "Every day." He looked down at his glass. "I used to think I missed my mother too. But I think what I miss most is the version of me that existed before she was gone." Elena's throat tightened. "What was he like?" Naive Henry said, almost smiling. He thought money could fix anything. That being the best would make him safe. Safe. From what? From losing people. He said quietly. The words hung between them like something sacred. Elena reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand. "You can't buy safety, Henry. You can only share it." He looked at their joined hands, her smaller fingers resting over his, and for a long moment didn't move. Then his thumb brushed lightly across her knuckles, and the simple gesture made her breath catch. "You talk like someone who's seen the world," he said. "I've only seen the parts that hurt," she whispered. "But maybe that's the only way to see clearly." He leaned back slightly, his eyes tracing her face, as if memorizing it. "You have a way of making everything sound like the truth. Maybe that's because I've stopped pretending." "And I haven't," he murmured. Her heart ached at the quiet resignation in his voice. "You could try." "I am trying," he said, barely above a whisper. Every time I look at you. The words hit her like soft thunder, tender, but unstoppable. For a moment, neither moved. The candle between them flickered, the air thick with something unspoken and fragile. Then Henry stood walking to the window. The city lights painted his silhouette in gold. You shouldn't make me feel this way, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Like what she asked, rising slowly. Like I care, he said, turning toward her. You were supposed to be part of a contract, a line in a document, nothing more. Elena's voice trembled. And now? Now, he said, stepping closer. You've become everything I can't stop thinking about. Her breath hitched. Henry. He reached her, then his hand finding her face, his touch gentler than anything she'd ever known. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Tell me this isn't wrong, he whispered. She could have said yes. She could have reminded him of the deal, the rules, the walls they both swore to keep standing. But when she looked up into his eyes, she saw something raw and aching, a man who'd never been allowed to want without consequence. And so she didn't speak. When he kissed her, it wasn't hunger that drove it, it was surrender. The kind that happens when two broken people finally stop fighting the pull between them. His hands framed her face, hers tangled in his hair. The world around them blurred, fading into nothing but the sound of their breaths, the warmth of their closeness, the quiet certainty that they were crossing a line they could never uncross. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, their breaths still mingling. I don't know what this means, she whispered. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know I can't go back to pretending you're just someone I hired. Her eyes glistened. What happens when the contract ends? He drew back slightly, his expression shadowed. I don't know yet. Maybe by then I'll have the courage to choose what I actually want. She smiled sadly. And what is it you want? He didn't answer. He just looked at her as though the question itself was too dangerous to touch. Later that night, after she'd gone to her room, Henry stood by the window, a glass of untouched wine in his hand. The city stretched endlessly, below 1,000 lives flickering in light. But none of it felt real, compared to the warmth that still lingered where she had been. He set the glass down, his reflection in the window, catching his own conflicted eyes. He had built his life on control, every deal, every word, every step calculated. But Elena had arrived like a quiet rebellion. And somehow in her presence, the man who could control entire empires couldn't even control his heartbeat. He heard footsteps behind him, soft, hesitant. Henry, her voice was quiet, uncertain. He turned. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a light shawl, her hair loose over her shoulders. I couldn't sleep, she said. The city's too loud. He smiled faintly. It never stops. Neither do you, she said gently. He gestured to the piano. Come here. She approached slowly, and he nodded toward the keys. Play something. Maybe it'll silence the city. She hesitated, then sat down. The melody she chose was slow and aching, like a memory she didn't want to let go of. Henry leaned against the piano, watching her fingers move, his heart twisting with something dangerously close to peace. When the song ended, she looked up at him. What are you thinking? That I haven't heard something this beautiful in a long time, he said softly. She smiled. Then maybe you're finally listening. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You make it sound easy. Maybe it is, she said, standing, if you stop running from it. He reached out, catching her hand before she could step away. His grip was firm but gentle, like someone holding on to something they feared might vanish. Elena, he said quietly, I don't know what happens next, but I need you to know. You've changed me. Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't say that if you don't mean it." "I do," he whispered, "and that terrifies me." Her fingers tightened around his. Maybe that's what love is. Henry being terrified and choosing it anyway. He stared at her, the word love hanging between them like a spark. Then he pulled her closer, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty, and kissed her again. Outside, the rain began to fall, tracing streaks down the glass. In the soft rhythm of that night, surrounded by the storm and the city, they found a fragile kind of peace, the kind that felt both inevitable and doomed. For the first time in years, Henry didn't feel like a man running from his past. And for the first time in her life, Elena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could bloom even in the unlikeliest of places, like light breaking through glass. But neither of them knew that in the shadows of that fragile happiness, something was already waiting, something that would test every word, every promise, and every heartbeat they had just dared to share. The morning after the kiss felt like waking from a dream you didn't want to end, until you remembered it wasn't supposed to happen at all. Sunlight poured through the sheer curtains, soft and golden, brushing against the silk sheets that still carried the scent of his cologne. Elena lay still, eyes open, her heart echoing with fragments of the night before his breath on her skin. The warmth of his hands, the way he'd whispered her name, like a confession he hadn't meant to make. She touched her lips, and the memory rushed back, sharp, tender, dangerous. It shouldn't have happened. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. She was supposed to carry his child, not his heart. But somewhere between silence and laughter, between his walls and her warmth, they had crossed the line. Neither of them had meant to. When she finally walked out of her room, the penthouse felt different. The air was thicker, the world quieter. Henry was by the window again, the skyline behind him, his posture immaculate as ever, except for the slight tension in his shoulders that betrayed everything. He turned when he heard her. "Elena." His tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't soft either. It was the voice of a man fighting himself. She managed a faint smile. "Morning." He nodded once. "Morning." The silence that followed was unbearable. "About last night," she began, but he interrupted, his voice low. It was a mistake. The words cut through her like glass. She looked at him, searching his face, hoping to find a flicker of hesitation. There was none. His eyes were steady, the same cold blue that had once terrified her, now hiding something she couldn't reach. "A mistake," she repeated quietly. "Yes," he said. "It shouldn't have happened." Her throat tightened. "Because of the contract." He exhaled, turning away. "Because of everything. Because I can't afford distractions. Because you deserve something I'm not capable of giving." She swallowed hard. "And what's that?" He hesitated, his voice breaking for just a second. "Love." She stared at him, heart trembling between fury and heartbreak. "You think love is something you can measure like your stocks or your losses, Elena?" "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice trembling but firm. "You can't decide what I deserve. You don't get to choose that for me." He looked at her, then truly looked, and for a moment, the mask cracked. Regret flashed in his eyes, like lightning in a storm, but he said nothing. She turned away before he could see her tears. "James will take you to the doctor this afternoon," Henry said quietly. "There's a new schedule for your checkups. You should rest afterward." She laughed bitterly. "You mean I should remember my role?" "Elena." "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't have to explain. I understand perfectly. I'm just a signature on a contract to you again." He didn't stop her when she walked away, and for the first time, The sound of her footsteps fading down the hall made him feel something close to fear. At the clinic, Elena sat alone, the world outside the window, moving like a blur. The nurse's words drifted past her ears, distant, meaningless. Everything looks normal, Miss Ramirez. Early stages, stable vitals. The pregnancy's progressing well. Pregnancy. The word hung in her mind like a truth she still couldn't fully grasp. When she stepped outside, the air felt heavier. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, not out of habit, but instinct. There's life inside me, she thought, both awed and terrified. His life. James opened the car door for her, but she stopped. Could you drop me somewhere else first? He looked uneasy. Mr. Ford asked me to. I won't be long, she said, forcing a smile. Please. After a long pause, he nodded. The coffee shop was quiet, tucked between two bookstores in Brooklyn, the kind of place that smelled of roasted beans and old paper. Elena used to come here with her mother, before everything fell apart. She sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. She could still hear Henry's voice in her mind. It was a mistake. But mistakes didn't make you feel like that, didn't make your heart race, didn't make silence feel sacred. Mistakes didn't make you believe, even for one moment, that you were seen. She realized then that the pain wasn't from what he'd said, it was from knowing he had meant it. Her phone buzzed. She didn't need to look to know it was him. Henry, where are you? You were supposed to be back an hour ago. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. Then she typed back, Elena, I just needed some air. The reply came fast. Henry. Come home, Elena, home. The word struck her. She wasn't sure what that meant anymore. After a moment, she typed, I will, and turned off the phone. Back at the penthouse, Henry paced the living room. He'd told himself he wasn't angry, just concerned, but the truth was uglier. He wasn't used to losing control, not over people, not over feelings, and definitely not over her. When he finally heard the elevator doors open, relief flickered quickly, replaced by frustration. Where were you? His voice was sharper than intended. Elena didn't flinch. Out. I know that, he said, stepping closer. You were gone for hours. I needed time, she said calmly. Time for what? To remember who I am. He stared at her, his jaw tightening. And who is that? Someone who doesn't belong here, she said quietly. He froze. What are you saying? I'm saying, maybe this isn't good for either of us, Henry. You built your world to keep people out. I can't keep pretending I'm the exception. His expression faltered. You're not pretending. You stop, she whispered. Don't make this harder. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say. Then softly she added, You told me once that love doesn't save anyone. Maybe you're right, but it shouldn't destroy them either. He closed his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. Don't leave. Her breath caught. Why not? Because I don't want you to. Her heart twisted. That's not enough. When she turned to walk away, he reached for her hand, desperate, unguarded. Elena, please. The sound of his voice, stripped of pride, stripped of control, made her stop. She looked back, tears blurring her vision. You can't ask me to stay when you're still too afraid to let me in. He dropped her hand slowly, as if it burned. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space that once felt like a sanctuary. Henry stood there, long after she was gone, staring at the closed door, every breath heavier than the last. That night, the penthouse was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. The absence of her laughter filled every corner, every echo. He tried to work, but every page of every document blurred. In the drawer beside his desk, he found the small note she'd written weeks ago. "You don't have to thank me. Just rest." He hadn't understood it then. Now it felt like prophecy. He thought of calling her, of saying, "I'm sorry," of admitting that somewhere between his control and her kindness, he had fallen. But the phone remained untouched. Because love, or whatever fragile, impossible thing this was, had always terrified him more than loss. He poured himself a drink, staring out at the city he owned, but could never feel at home in. "You told me love doesn't save anyone." Her words echoed through his mind, quiet but relentless. And for the first time, Henry Ford, the man who had built his empire from stone and silence, realized that he had built his heart the same way. But stone, when cracked, doesn't heal. It shatters. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of the breaking. Rain swept across Manhattan again, the kind that blurred the world into a watercolor of silver and gray. Henry watched it from his office window. The city lights fractured through streaks of water. It had been 3 weeks since Elena left the penthouse, 3 weeks since silence became his only companion. The first week he told himself it was temporary, that she would come back once she'd cooled off, once she remembered the comfort, the protection, the life he could offer her. The second week, he told himself it was better this way, that distance would keep them both safe. But by the third week, even the lie had started to sound hollow. He'd gone through every distraction, meetings, acquisitions, long nights at the gym, but the quiet still found him. Every evening he returned to the penthouse and found her absence louder than any argument they'd ever had. The coffee cups remained where she used to leave them. The piano hadn't been touched. Her laughter, soft and unexpected, lingered in the corners like a ghost, refusing to leave. James had noticed, of course, but said nothing. The staff spoke in lower voices. Even the security guards looked away when he passed, as if sensing the fracture in their impenetrable CEO. He had thought he knew loneliness, but he hadn't known this. Then came the letter. It arrived on a gray morning, delivered by his assistant, sealed in cream stationery, with no return address. Henry opened it with mechanical precision. His eyes caught the signature first, and everything else fell away. Elena. "Henry, I know you don't want apologies, and I'm not writing to offer one. I just wanted you to know that I'm safe and that I kept my promise. The doctor says the baby is strong, healthy. I don't expect you to understand what I need right now, but I have to find my own strength before I can be part of your world again. Maybe someday you'll understand that leaving wasn't about giving up on you. It was about saving myself. E." He read it once, then again. His hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled slightly. "The baby is strong." The words hit him like a heartbeat he hadn't realized he'd been missing. A child. His child. For the first time in years, the man who ruled empires found himself utterly still. He set the letter down carefully, then reached for his phone. But when he opened his contacts, he hesitated. What would he even say? Come back. "I'm sorry, I can't live without you." He closed the phone, exhaling shakily. His father's words echoed from the past. "You need an heir, Henry. A legacy." He had thought legacy meant bloodline. Now it meant something else entirely. It meant her. Elena stood on the porch of a small seaside house in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the late afternoon sun dip beneath the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly, the waves carrying a rhythm that reminded her of the piano she'd left behind. The air here was softer salt and wind instead of glass and steel. The first night she'd arrived, she couldn't sleep. The bed felt too empty, the silence too forgiving. But slowly the stillness had begun to heal her. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly. Beneath it, the faintest flutter life, stirring real and undeniable. "Looks like it's just us for now," she whispered, smiling faintly. Her mother's old friend Rosa came out onto the porch carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've been standing there too long, Nina. You'll catch a chill." Elena smiled and took the cup. "I'm fine." Rosa studied her carefully. "You look better than when you came. But your eyes, they still carry New York in them." Elena laughed softly. "New York doesn't leave easily." "And neither does he," Rosa said knowingly. Elena froze. "I didn't mention. You didn't have to. Men like that don't just disappear from a woman's face." Elena looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "It's complicated. Of course it is. Love always is. But complicated doesn't mean impossible." Elena didn't answer. Instead, she stared out at the ocean, its endless horizon, reminding her of all the things she still didn't understand. Rosa reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're strong, Elena, stronger than you think. But you can't heal if you keep pretending you don't miss him." Elena blinked back sudden tears. "Missing him doesn't mean I can forgive him." "Maybe not," Rosa said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't always start with them. Sometimes it starts with you." 2 months passed. Henry hadn't stopped searching. He told no one but James. Officially, it was a discreet inquiry about a confidential medical matter. In truth, he was trying to trace Elena's steps without scaring her away. Every few days, he'd receive reports, vague mentions of clinics, possible sightings, traces that led nowhere. Until one morning, James entered his office with a thin folder and a cautious look. "We found her." Henry froze. "Where?" "Charleston. Coastal area. She's renting a small house near the water." Henry's pulse quickened. "Is she?" "She's fine," James said. "Healthy. So is the child." Henry's grip on the desk loosened. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "Do you want me to contact her?" James asked quietly. Henry shook his head. "No, I'll go myself." The drive from the Charleston airport to the coast was quiet. The world outside the car changed slowly, skyscrapers fading into oak trees, the sharp scent of rain softening into sea breeze. Henry hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd seen the ocean. When he reached the house, he stopped for a moment before getting out. It was small white shutters. A wooden porch flowers by the window. Simple. Peaceful. It didn't belong to his world, and yet something about it felt right. He saw her before she saw him. She was standing near the garden wearing a light blue dress that moved with the wind, her dark curls tied loosely at her neck. She looked different, softer, but stronger too. And when she turned, their eyes met. For a second, the world went still. "Henry." Her voice trembled, a mix of disbelief and memory. He took a hesitant step forward. "Elena, what are you doing here? I had to see you." "You shouldn't have." "I know," he said quietly, "but I did anyway." She crossed her arms, holding herself together. "How did you find me?" "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said sharply. "Because I left for a reason." He swallowed. "I know. And I've spent every day trying to understand that reason." Her eyes softened, despite herself. "And I think," he said slowly, "you left because I made you believe you weren't safe with me." She looked down. "You made me believe I wasn't seen." He stepped closer. "You were always seen. I just didn't know how to look." The quiet stretched between them, filled with the sound of the ocean and their unspoken hearts. After a long moment, he said, "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. He reached out his hand, trembling slightly, and placed it gently on her belly. For a moment, nothing, and then a faint movement beneath his palm, small but alive. His breath caught. That's our child," he whispered. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Yes." He looked up at her then, and all the pride, all the control, all the steel melted away. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for everything, for every word I used to keep you out, for every time I chose silence instead of truth." Her tears fell silently. "I wanted to believe you could love me, Henry, not because of what I gave you, but because of who I was." "I do," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't know it then, but I do now. I love you, Elena, and I love what we created together." The wind carried the words between them, fragile and real. She shook her head, a sob caught in her throat. "You can't just show up and say that. You can't fix everything with words." "I know," he whispered, "but I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." She turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You don't understand. I can't go back to that world, to being controlled, to being someone's secret." "You won't be," he said, taking another step. "You'll be the only thing that's real in it." She closed her eyes. "And if I can't believe that," he hesitated, pain flickering in his eyes, "then I'll wait until you can." The ocean roared behind them, waves breaking against the sand, the sun dipping lower into the horizon. Elena looked at him, torn between the love she still felt and the fear she couldn't forget. "Henry," she whispered, "don't make promises you don't understand." He smiled, faintly sadness in every line of it. "For the first time, Elena, I think I finally do." And as the last light of day slipped beneath the water, she stood before him, the man she'd once run from, the man she still loved, realizing that forgiveness, like love, wasn't a single choice. It was 1,000 small ones, waiting quietly between two hearts that had both learned how to break. The storm arrived that night. The Charleston sky was torn open by thunder, the wind howling through the palms, rain pounding against the wooden porch like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Inside, Elena sat by the window, her hands resting on her stomach, listening to the storm roll through the coast. It had been 3 days since Henry showed up, 3 long days of silence after that trembling confession on the porch. He hadn't tried to see her again. He'd simply left his hotel address with Rosa, saying softly, "If she wants to talk, she'll know where to find me." And now, as lightning cut across the horizon, she wondered if he was still there waiting, or perhaps realizing she was never going to come. Her thoughts were interrupted by Rosa's voice from the kitchen. "Nina, the rain's getting worse. Come sit by the fire. You shouldn't be alone right now." Elena smiled faintly. "I'm not alone." Her hand brushed her belly, feeling that gentle kick, a small reminder that life had a rhythm of its own, whether the world outside was chaos or calm. But when the next thunder cracked so close it rattled the windows, she flinched, and something sharp twisted in her stomach. Pain. Sudden, deep, unmistakable. Her breath hitched. "Rosa." The older woman rushed to her side, eyes widening. "Elena, what is it? I think it's time. But you're early." Another wave of pain hit stronger. Elena gripped Rosa's arm, her face pale. "Please call the hospital." Rosa's hands shook as she grabbed the phone, but the storm outside had taken the lines down. There was no signal. "Dios mío," Rosa whispered. "We need to get you to the car. Now." Across town, Henry stared out the window of his hotel room, watching rain hammer against the glass. He'd told himself he'd give her space. He wouldn't push her again. But space, it turned out, was a cruel thing. Every minute without her felt like standing in the wreckage of something he couldn't rebuild. He'd come here to make things right, but maybe it was too late. He turned away from the window and poured another drink, though he didn't touch it. The lightning flashed again, and then faintly through the storm, he thought he heard a car horn, a woman's voice shouting in panic. Something in his chest tightened. He didn't know why he ran, only that his heart told him to. The rain turned the world into a blur of motion and sound. Rosa's old car sputtered down the flooded road headlights, slicing through sheets of rain. Elena's breaths came short, uneven. "Hold on, mija," Rosa said, her voice trembling. "We're almost there." Elena tried to speak, but another contraction silenced her. The pain was relentless, now pulsing through her body like a tidal wave. And then, through the storm, she saw headlights approaching fast from the opposite lane. A black SUV moving too quickly for this weather. Rosa before. Rosa could react. The SUV swerved not toward them, but into a ditch just ahead, skidding, spinning wildly. Rosa slammed the brakes, tires screaming, the car fishtailing before coming to a shuddering stop. For a moment, everything was still except Elena's labored breathing. "Oh my God," Rosa gasped. "We need to help them." "No," Elena cried, gripping her stomach. "We need to get to the hospital." Rosa looked torn, until a figure emerged from the other car, soaked and running toward them. Elena Henry. He reached the window, rain streaming down his face, his voice frantic. "The bridge ahead is flooded. You can't go through." Rosa looked at him in shock. "Senor Ford, she's in labor." "I know," he shouted over the thunder. "There's a clinic on Bay Road closer than the hospital. I'll drive you there." He didn't wait for permission. Within seconds, he'd lifted Elena carefully from the seat, cradling her against his chest as she groaned in pain. "Henry." She gasped, clutching his shirt. "What are you doing here?" "Finding you," he said hoarsely. "And I'm not losing you again." The next 20 minutes were a blur of chaos and mercy. The rain refused to stop, but somehow through flooded streets and fallen branches, Henry drove like a man possessed, steady, focused, every muscle wired with fear and determination. Rosa sat in the back, whispering prayers in Spanish as Elena's cries filled the car. "Just breathe, love," Henry said, his hand gripping hers tightly. "We're almost there." She looked at him through tears. "You can't fix everything, Henry." "Maybe not," he said, voice breaking. "But I can be here now." When they finally reached the small clinic, the doctor and nurses rushed them inside. The staff moved quickly, voices calm but urgent. Henry stood just outside the delivery room, drenched his hands, shaking as he stared at the door that separated him from the only thing that mattered. Every second stretched into eternity. He thought of all the things he hadn't said, all the moments he'd wasted behind walls. He thought kept him safe. Please God, he thought, just let her be okay. Then a cry, small, sharp, and impossibly alive. A baby's cry. He froze, his breath catching as the sound broke through the storm still raging outside. Moments later, the nurse opened the door, smiling softly. "You can come in now, Mr. Ford." The world felt impossibly still when he entered. The rain had softened to a whisper against the windows, the chaos replaced by a fragile golden quiet. Elena lay on the bed, pale but glowing, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and wonder. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in white. When she looked up and saw him, her lips trembled into a smile. "She's here." He approached slowly, as if afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. "May I?" he whispered. She nodded, and when he took the baby into his arms, something in him broke in the most beautiful way possible. The tiny girl opened her eyes, impossibly dark and full of life, and for the first time in years, Henry felt whole. "She's perfect," he murmured. "She has your eyes," Elena said softly. He looked at her, his heart twisting. "No, she has yours. She has your light." Elena's smile faltered, tears glimmering. "Henry." He sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby. "You were right," he said quietly. "Love doesn't save you, but it gives you something to live for, something worth being brave for." She blinked, silent tears falling. "I don't know if I deserve you," he continued, voice trembling, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." Elena reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle. "You already have. You came back." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "I'll never leave again." Their daughter made a small sound between them, soft and innocent, as if sealing a promise. For the first time, Henry smiled, not the polite curve of power or the practiced charm of a CEO, but something raw, unguarded, real. Outside, the storm finally broke, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of dawn. The light spilled through the window, painting the room in gold. Rosa peeked in quietly, her eyes filling with tears at the sight before her. Elena looked at Henry, whispering, "What will we call her?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Grace." Elena's lips curved. "Grace Ford," she whispered, testing the sound. "No," Henry said softly, looking at her with warmth that felt like home. "Grace Ramirez Ford. Both names, both worlds." She laughed through her tears. "That's perfect." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice breaking. "Thank you, Elena, for not giving up on me, for giving me her." She looked at him, her heart full. "We both needed saving, Henry. We just didn't know it would come in such a small package." He laughed quietly, the sound trembling but alive. The baby stirred her tiny hand, brushing against his wrist, and in that fragile, miraculous touch, everything changed. The man who had once believed he was too broken to love now held the proof that love, when it's real, rebuilds what fear destroys. Elena leaned back against the pillows, her eyes fluttering closed as Henry cradled their daughter. He watched them both, his family, and something deep in him settled for the first time in his life. Weeks later, as the morning sun painted Charleston in shades of amber, Henry walked out to the porch with a cup of coffee in one hand and Grace asleep in the other. Elena followed, her robe fluttering gently in the sea breeze. The world was quiet again, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of peace. He looked at her, smiling softly. "Do you ever miss New York?" She thought for a moment. Sometimes, but not the noise, or the board meetings he teased. She laughed. Definitely not those. He stepped closer, his free hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we'll stay here as long as you want. I can work from anywhere." Her eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure of one thing," he said, leaning in, his voice quiet and certain. "Home isn't a place anymore. It's you." The wind carried his words. The ocean shimmered in the distance, and their daughter slept between them. The bridge between two broken souls who had finally found their way back to each other. As the waves broke softly along the shore, Elena whispered, "After everything we went through, I still believe in us." Henry smiled, his voice barely a whisper. "That's all I need." And there, under the rising sun, love, fragile, flawed, and utterly human, found its way home again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because love, when it's real, always finds a way back, no matter how far it's wandered.